All right. I think maybe I just had a connection issue. I do apologize about that. So let's go ahead and start that over, I guess. We had a beatdown in Baltimore, and this is not going to be a fun game to talk about. Um, the the biggest thing is this is the tied for the worst loss in the Pete Carroll era, dropping 37-3, losing by 34 points. Last time he did that was his first year as head coach. I think we went 7-9 that season. So not a lot that we're going to love talking about in this. The good thing is the Niners were on a 3-game skid, and we are tied at the top record wise. One thing that is kind of a problem going into this is although we are 5-3, the point differential is a little bit misleading in the way that we have 171 points for and 175 against. So the fact that we have a winning record with a negative point differential is it's scary, right? Like it's impressive that they've been able to do it. It's bad because when you start playing better teams, that will not hold up. So that being said, let's get into some of these stats because everybody keeps piling on Geno. And although I'm not a huge Geno fan or a Geno apologist by any means, there's some things that you can't pile on to Geno. Now, does he need to make better decisions? Of course, absolutely. He's had 6 turnovers in the last 3 games. Obviously, that's not sustainable if you want to win games. But that being said, when you think about who they played the Bengals, right? That's a top 10 defense. They played the Browns, arguably the best defense in the league. They, through 6 weeks, were the stingiest defense when it comes to yardage. Then you go against the Ravens, who right now probably have the best defense in the league. So over the last 3 weeks, you played a top 10 and 2, we'll call them top 5s. So any mistake can be a big mistake when you're playing that level of defense. Now, obviously, they're not going to run into that kind of defense this weekend, so I'm not too worried about it on that front. But there's a lot of things that has to get cleaned up. One of them is third downs. You can't be going 1-12 on third down. You can't have a game where you only have 6 first downs. You also, in a team that is designed to run first, you can't have 28 yards for the game. And realistically, it wasn't even 28 yards. It was 24 yards because 4 of those were Geno scrambling. So when you have 24 yards of total rushing offense, you're not going to win a lot of games in this league. So there were a lot of things, a lot of blame to go around. Obviously, the offensive line is a huge issue. If you're only getting 24 yards rushing, your offensive line isn't getting their job done because that means you have absolutely no rushing lanes. They were averaging under 2 yards a carry. And I mean, at some point, you fall far enough behind that you have to kind of abandon the game. But, you went through the entire first quarter without without any points on the board. So it's not like they jumped out on top 21-0 immediately and you just had to get away from the running game. They just couldn't run the ball. And then later in the game, by the time you were down as much as they were, yeah, obviously now you're throwing the ball around the yard and you're just trying to make big plays. Mistakes happen as soon as you have to become one dimensional. So kudos to the Ravens for doing exactly what they were supposed to do. And unfortunately, if you watched my show last week, I outlined how it is they would beat the Seahawks. And it was with Lamar not being able to be contained and running routes through the middle because that's been a weak spot, and, running up the middle again, just because there's been moving pieces. And sadly, we got to watch 3 hours of exactly what I outlined. So that was a tough game to watch, to say the least. But, the other part of Geno getting piled on, saying he has to be better and all of that, just to give you some perspective of the offensive line play that is happening. So not only were they not good in the rushing offense as far as opening lanes and giving protection for Walker and Charbonnet to be able to get into that second level, of the 35 dropbacks that Geno had, he had 17 quarterback hurries. That means in almost half of his snaps, he was moved off his spot. Now, I don't care how good of a quarterback you are. if you're under duress half of the game, you're probably not going to be wildly accurate. You're also probably not going to make the best decisions because you don't have the standard amount of time, which is still not a lot of time, right? Like most quarterbacks have to get the ball out within 3 seconds, right? And if you can't even get that, it's hard to digest what is happening downfield in a second and a half. I mean, I don't care how talented your quarterback is. If you are constantly being moved off your spot, hit, it's going to be tough to be accurate. Now, they did only sack him 4 times. So, good on Geno as far as being able to at least get rid of the ball, whatever. But, at the end of the day, that is not a recipe for success if your guy is under duress nonstop. Now, Pro Football Focus actually broke this down a little bit, and so you can find these stats on with them, and so Forsyth gave up 5 hurries, Evan Brown 4 hurries, Peters, Hines, and Cross all with 2 apiece, right? So that's your 17 quarterback hurries. Again, that is not going to that won't do good things for your offense if your quarterback has to be running around and avoiding sacks constantly. If you're worried about getting hit, you're probably not looking very far downfield. So that being said, this is a scenario where they did absolutely nothing well. And I don't know how much you can really glean from watching tape of this game simply because there was nothing to build on. Like every piece of that tape was bad. They sacked Lamar once. There was a couple of decent hits, but mostly it was a lot of missed tackles. The time of possession was out of hand. The Seahawks had just under 20 minutes and the Ravens had just over 40 minutes. So, I mean, there really wasn't anything that you watched in that game where you're like, that we can build on that. Basically, this is a burn the tape and call it a day and, move on to next week and hope that, hope the next time you see him, if you get to see him again, that you learned something from it. Right. I mean, you're not necessarily going to watch the tape and look at tendencies because anything they wanted to do, they were able to do. So, all right. Now, we ended up with a lot of questions this week, which makes sense because typically off of a loss, we do. And so this is, we'll just get it kicked off. All right. So we have, is Abe Lucas coming back? So yes and no. He's not technically on IR anymore. I don't think. I think this last week was his last week of that. But Pete says that he is not. He's close. He lists him as close, but not ready. He hasn't practiced at all this week, so he won't be available for this game. That being said, we may see him on the practice field next week, which means we could potentially see him for the Rams game, which would be a good game for him to get back into the swing of things before we go on the gauntlet of the Niners, the Cowboys, the Niners again, and the Eagles. Like that's going to be a rough stretch. So if we can get some of these guys back in time for the Rams game, that'd be a good one to get everybody back up to speed. The Rams are struggling. Obviously, Stafford is injured. So it's another game that they should be able to win. And, if you can get guys up to speed in that game, as opposed to stepping right in against the Niners, obviously that would be better. But as far as coming into this week, he is still not available. Will the Hawks D get a sack this week? Absolutely. So, I mean, they ended up getting one on Lamar, which is hard to do anyway. But even after this last week, and as bad as it was, they are still 8th in the league as far as sacks are concerned. They have 27 on the year, and they're going to go up against a Washington team that does not protect well. So Sam Howell has actually been sacked 44 times this year. And I would imagine that the Seahawks defense, especially coming off an embarrassing loss where they didn't do anything particularly well, they're going to come in ready to get after the guy. You also have a situation where Frank Clark and Leonard Williams are now a game into the system. So they're going to probably play a little bit better, a little bit freer. And yeah, I would imagine that they probably get 4 or 5 sacks on Sam Howell on Sundays. So that's encouraging, unless you're Sam Howell, because he's been getting beat up back there. And now they don't have much of a defense since they traded those pieces away. All right. What do I think of Jamal Adams saying they came out and hit us in the mouth? Simple as that. He is not wrong. In fact, if you went on to listen to the rest of that press conference, he also said that the defense didn't play particularly well. They missed a lot of tackles. He admitted he missed a lot of tackles. So, yeah, I mean, he's not wrong. Like they came out and absolutely beat him up, and they had no answer for it. Basically, after the first quarter, this game was not particularly close. If you were a fan, you were probably enjoying extra beers at lunch, or at halftime, I should say, and just because that game got out of hand real quick. All right. What do I think of most power rankings having the Seahawks falling to 9 or 10? I mean, that's where they should be. The ones that had them ranked higher than that, I was actually a little bit surprised about. So the highest I've had the Seahawks, and this is as a Seahawk fan. So, there's always the blue and green tinted glasses a little bit. I try not to, but, there's some. And, the biggest thing is I think the highest I've had them in my power rankings is 8th. And so for them to be on most metrics at 9 or 10, that's where they should be. They're 10th on mine. So, I mean, you feel pretty good about where they are. They've played good, but they haven't played great. And they've had a lot of injuries. So I actually give them a little bit more grace than I probably normally would, just because they've had so many guys on the injury report all year. And, if for them to still be pulling out games with a rotating offensive line, because we've seen this movie before, and it doesn't usually equal wins, right? We watched the Rams and the Cards go through this last year, where they had a rotating cast of offensive linemen, and it didn't equal a lot of wins. So the fact that they've been able to pull off these wins with both offensive tackles out for 4 games. Obviously, Lucas is still out. Cross is back, but not playing particularly great because he's still kind of beat up. We're using tight ends to help in the blocking schemes. I mean, there's so many things that say these guys should be losing games, that the fact that they're still pulling out wins, kudos to some of these offensive designs, and, kudos to just the coaching staff in general. Now, I've seen people complain about the fact that these plays don't look, particularly creative or anything like that. Well, the creative part of it actually isn't the play down the field. The creative part is the blocking schemes that they've had for Geno, because that offensive line is so beat up. So they have guys that are coming in. It's why you've seen split back setups with Charbonnet and Walker on the field at the same time. Like I've said in other shows, they've run a lot of 13 and 23 personnel, which means there's 3 tight ends on the field. There's been scenarios where the 2 of the tight ends are lined up directly next to Geno to add protection, to help create some running lanes. So even though the play calling doesn't look like it's incredibly creative as far as pushing the ball down the field, the creative part of those plays is keeping Geno off the grass. So I can't be too mad at the play calling. And the fact that, again, they've been able to stay competitive and win games despite the fact that they really haven't had an offensive line. And that's something that the Cards and the Rams weren't able to do last year when they were running into a very similar situation. All right. DK said that Lockett is the best athlete he's ever seen. It's funny because people look at DK and he is just this monster of a human. And I can actually see what he sees in that. I mean, I don't know if he's the best athlete on the planet, obviously, but Lockett is quite the athlete, right? He's really good at what he does. Pound for pound, he can hang with anybody. So, he's got a good catch radius for not being a huge guy. He runs an incredibly clean route, creates separation. makes smart moves, albeit as a fan can be frustrating when he catches the ball, goes to the ground. But it means that he's been relatively healthy because he doesn't take a lot of those big hits. So as much as it's tough to watch, it also means that he's available, right? And there's always that adage, your best ability is availability. And for the most part, Lockett stays available. Plus, he has quietly gone for 4,000-yard seasons in a row and was 35 yards roughly from having a fifth one in a row. So, I don't think he's on pace this year. I think he's roughly 450 yards this year. So he's not quite on pace to hit 1,000 for the fifth year in a row, but there's still a lot of football left. So we'll see what happens. That being said, we're going up against some pretty good defenses after these next 2 weeks get out of the way. But no, I could see where DK is coming from, especially as far as football. There's not too many guys that are doing it better than what Lockett has been doing over the last 5 years. Will Frank Clark and Leonard Williams have a bigger impact this week? Both only had 1 tackle each. Yes. So one, that was their first game, right? The other thing is they weren't particularly schemed for success this last week, right? Like we said in the beginning here, nothing they were doing was working. There was a lot of missed tackles. So, I mean, anything's going to be an improvement, right? I would imagine both of them are going to be able to create some havoc. The thing that I don't love is there's always so much emphasis on the fact that people are looking for sacks, right? And as much as sacks are impressive, like it's a great stat. Awesome. I wish there was more emphasis on quarterback hurries, because whether or not you get home, if you can move a guy off his spot, like we've seen with Geno, right? If you can move a guy off his spot, all of a sudden that creates a lot of opportunities for turnovers on the back end, right? It's going to be an errant pass. It's going to be early. It's going to be off target. There's a lot of situations where I would rather have a quarterback hurry than the sack itself, because you could potentially end up with interceptions or, things like that. So as impressive as sacks are, I like a quarterback hurry. Now, I mean, if you can get home and you can, put him to the ground, then, I mean, obviously that is great. But there's a lot of scenarios where teams will end up with decent sack numbers, but don't have a lot of quarterback hurries. So although you had a first and 10, you get in there, you sack the guy, now you're 2nd and 14, but then, your line play isn't consistent and they pick those up, then, how good was that sack really? Whereas if you can end up with quarterback hurries 2 out of the 3 downs, well, I mean, they may not convert the first down in that scenario. So do I like sacks? Of course. Do I look more at the quarterback hurries? I do, because of how much disruption that creates in an offensive scheme. So do I think that they can be an impact? Sure. Will they get sack numbers? I don't know, but I'm not necessarily worried about the sack total as far as, just a stat on its own. I want to see the quarterback hurries. If those lead to stats, awesome. But if they're just standalone, you ended up with 4 sacks, but there was like 6 quarterback hurries, that D-line still isn't getting their job done, even though it looks like it was okay on paper. So give me quarterback hurries over, over sack totals. I mean, unless you end up like the Giants game where there's 11 sacks, obviously, if you can do that, then you're going to win that game. All right. So this one is a combination of about 8 questions / comments that essentially breaks down to this. This is all Geno's fault. So let's just roll through this a little bit, because there is plenty of fault to go around, especially for this last week. So 28 yards rushing. Now, Geno doesn't hand the ball off to himself, right? Like that's 2 other dudes. That's Walker and Charbonnet, and that requires an offensive line to give them somewhere to run to, or at least run through, right? Like you need a gap. And as talented as those running backs are and as small as the gap can be, there has to still be one. And that was not the case. They rushed for, again, 24 yards because 4 of those were Geno's. So doesn't inspire a lot of confidence there. As far as I know, Geno plays quarterback, and that defense gave up 515 yards. Now, unless he happened to throw on a different jersey and he's a corner and I didn't realize it, he has very little to do with them giving up 515 yards, almost 300 of which was rushing yards, right? So, I mean, that is, you need to be able to tackle people. Again, that's not in Geno's wheelhouse. They were giving up 6.9 yards a play. I mean, you don't have to get to a lot of third downs when you're getting almost 7 yards a play. Now, obviously, Geno has to play better. He can't have these turnovers. He's got to make better decisions. He has to not press the ball. He has to accept the fact that when a play isn't there, to throw it away and live to play another down. Obviously, all of that is true. And he's not that elite guy. Like, I don't know that anybody really thought that he was going to be Josh Allen, Mahomes, Burrow. Like, he's not that dude. And he's never been that dude. He is a system guy, not dissimilar to a Jared Goff or a Matt Stafford or, Brock Purdy. Like, if everything is in place and he has a little bit of time to dissect the defense, he is a good quarterback. He'll get the job done. If he has a rotating offensive line and he is moved off his spot and thrown on the ground a lot, he is not going to make a lot of smart decisions because you just don't have time to. But he's not that guy that's going to be able to come out and play hero ball and just make it happen. If he has to come out and play hero ball, he's going to make a lot of mistakes. Now, the other end of that is, it's not like he's leading the league in interceptions. That's Josh Allen, who plays a lot of hero ball. So be careful what you're wishing for there. And then of course there's the fact that they went 1 for 12 on third down. Now, some of that is obviously Geno. Some of that is the fact that we couldn't run the ball. So there was a lot of third and longs. Well, there's not a lot in your offensive playbook for third and long. It is you're throwing the ball, you're hoping, and the defense knows you are throwing the ball. So they don't have to come after you. They get to lay back. They get to play real free defense. And, it makes it much harder to pick those things up because they know if you run, everybody can break down onto the ball. And odds are you're not going to make the first down marker. So there is a ton of fault to go around in this. Obviously, some play calling was an issue. And so from top to bottom, everybody is to blame for this loss. And does Geno have to play better? Of course. Is it interesting that every time they lose, they're calling for Drew Lock? Like, I don't know what you think Drew Lock is. He's a different player, obviously. But he's also that career backup kind of guy. And so would he come in and win a game? Sure. Right? Because nobody has tape on him currently. So everybody loves a backup quarterback for the first game because a lot of times they can come in and win because nobody knows what their tendencies are. The problem with that backup quarterback is a lot of times that skill level is a significant drop. And after you have a game or two of tape, everybody knows what they're going to do. And then all of a sudden your Cinderella story of your backup quarterback isn't one anymore. And then what do you do? Right? You've already benched Geno. Now you have Locke. He's not really getting it done either. What's your answer there? Right? So let's calm down a little bit. There's only, 4 elite quarterbacks in the league. Not everybody has one. You can win without an elite quarterback. I mean, if you have a good enough defense and you play smart on the offensive side, the 2000 Ravens is probably the best example of this. I've made it a ton of times. They had an elite defense. They were smart with the football, and you can have Trent Dilfer win you a Super Bowl, right? He's not an elite arm talent. He was smart. He didn't throw the ball into harm's way, and he let his defense take care of business. So if you can maintain possession of the ball and you're smart with the distribution of it, and you realize, hey, the play's not here, you throw it away. Geno can be that Trent Dilfer type of guy, and you can go deep into the playoffs, potentially win a ring. Now, the defense obviously has to play better, and he has to be smarter with the football, but you don't have to have an elite guy to win. So, all right. Is what's wrong with the offense? Injuries. Is the offense fixable? Okay, so there's a few things there. Injuries is the biggest issue with this offense, and it really comes down to that offensive line. There's just really no getting around it. Like if you don't have guys blocking up front, I don't care how many weapons you have. I mean, DK, Lockett, and JSN should absolutely be tearing this up. And then you pair it with Walker and Charbonnet, and then you bring in Bobo as a fourth receiver from time to time. You got Noah Fant, who is an absolute stud as a tight end. So, I mean, there are plenty of pieces. But if you don't have enough time to get the ball to him, or if you have a running back that's getting hit about the same time he gets the ball, there's not a lot of success that's going to be had. So they really need this offensive line to get healthy. Honestly, I mean, they need Lucas back in a big way. They need Cross to be fully healthy. He's still dealing with a knee injury. It's why I've said that they should at least go take a look at Fluker, because if you've watched him on YouTube, he looks really quick. He's dropped a ton of weight, looks incredibly fit. He's not on a roster, so you don't have to worry about any of that. Any of that situation where there's trades or anything like that, since the trade deadline's gone. So a guy that's available like a DJ Fluker, that is something that they should bring in. They should at least give him a tryout because he's been a Seahawk before. He's familiar with the way the system operates. I feel like even when Lucas gets back, Fluker could be a good depth piece. I mean, I don't know. It's interesting that they haven't made a move on that front, especially with the amount of injuries. They went and got a couple of defensive line guys, which I don't mind those acquisitions at all. But man, they really need to address the fact that their tackles are as beat up as they are, because against the good teams, the multiple tight end sets just aren't quite getting it done. And that's understandable because they are trying to go block, 6'5", 350-pound Samoan dudes. I don't know a lot of tight ends that are taking that on heads up and winning. So, yeah. All right. Has DK gotten past all his penalties? Well, it's been a game, so let's pump the brakes on that. He's gone other games without penalties, and I hope that it is, right? Because you want him on the roster. I know I've talked, numerous times about potentially trading him because you can get a 1 and a 2 or maybe 2 1s just because he is an absolute stud of an athlete. So I don't know. Like the real question is who knows? Has he gotten enough chatter in the ear from the coaching staff saying, hey, you need to figure out how to stop doing this? I don't know. That's yet to be seen. I hope yes, because I would much rather him be on the roster. But time will tell. So I don't have a good answer for that because we don't know. He's had games, a game or two in a row, even where he doesn't do anything, and then he'll pop off and get a couple of penalties. And so, that's just yet to be seen, but we'll know soon enough. Should the Hawks try and go get Harbaugh if Michigan lets him go? No. what are we talking about right now? No, I mean, you remember how Harbaugh was when he was in our division. I mean, yes, he wins, hands down. He wins everywhere he goes. At every stop of his coaching, destinations, he has come away with wins. So, without a doubt, it wouldn't be a terrible thing in that way. That being said, he absolutely grates on people, and that is not something that I think the Seattle fan base would necessarily love. I mean, he was annoying to deal with 2 times a year when he was with the Niners. So I can't imagine having him in the building every week. Besides, Pete is under contract for another 2 years, right? It's the end of 25, I think, is the end. So, um, so no, plainly, I don't think that's how that'll work out. Where I see him potentially going is I could see him going to Vegas potentially. Um, if their interim head coach doesn't rattle off some wins and win that job permanently. I could also see him going to Washington if, well, not really if, but when Rivera gets fired, I could see Harbaugh going there, especially since they were, getting rid of players. Right? They got rid of Sweat, they got rid of Chase Young. So with those added draft picks, all of a sudden bringing in a guy like Harbaugh to Washington actually makes a ton of sense because he's going to have a lot of inside knowledge of players because he's been at the college level. He's coached with or against a lot of these players. He's going to have some insights that normal scouts just wouldn't. And, it's how you saw Pete Carroll and Schneider come in and build something awesome when he first got here is he came from SC, right? And you got to see he got to see a lot of players that a lot of these scouts wouldn't see in depth. And so I think he could actually bring something to that Washington team, whatever they're going to call that team next year. And yeah, it's so, but no, he's not coming to Seattle. All right. Is it me or does this guy look like a baby with facial hair glued on? Uh, okay. Like I'm not sure who we're talking about. All right. Let's see. You should do okay. So this one is hilarious to me. I laughed it off at first, and then all of a sudden, I was thinking this might not be the worst idea ever, just based on some of the questions that I've had. And this is, I was suggested to do a weekly show so that the Swifties can learn about football. And when this was first floated to me, I laughed a lot. But then I ended up getting some followers on my Twitter that are in that Swifties group. And I ended up getting some very basic football questions. And I mean, it probably wouldn't be a horrible idea. Now, I want the NFL to stop, going so overboard about Taylor Swift being in the building. Obviously, when I'm watching football, I'm there to watch football. I don't really care who's in the stands. But I do get where this question's derived from because, it'd be good with all these new viewers of the league if they have a basic idea of what is actually going on. So it wasn't really a question, it was a statement, but I'm kicking the idea around. So we'll see. But it's one that I have gotten a couple of times. So maybe. I don't know. we'll see. We'll see. All right. Where do I think the Hawks end up? So, at the beginning of the season, I had them as a 10-7 team. I still think they're a 10-7 team. I looked at them going to the divisional round, making it through making it through the wild card. It'll depend on who they play, right? It'll depend on where they're seated. But that's kind of what I look at. I still look at them as a 10-7 team. Again, my pick before the season was a Eagles Ravens Super Bowl. So at least that pick is still looking like it's probably pretty good. And I mean, the Hawks are still kind of on pace to have that 10-7 season. So I still think that they're probably about there. All right. Is this a game where you burn the tape and move on? Pretty much. Yeah. Yeah. There was really nothing good to take away from this game. So this is one where, yeah, you probably just say we did nothing well and you move on. If you end up having to face these guys in the playoffs, then, maybe or I guess it'd be the Super Bowl, right? Then maybe in that scenario, you look at some of the tape to hopefully figure out where it is they picked you apart. But yeah, I mean, outside of that, you probably just move on because there's not a lot to see that you're gonna be able to build off of. All right. Uh, do Gino and DK not like each other because they seem like they're never on the same page? It is a little bit interesting that they really don't seem to have a good connection. I'm not really sure what the deal is there. I don't think it really is a an issue with them not liking each other. They just seem like they don't have that nonverbal communication that a lot of quarterbacks have, where if Gino has to start moving around, it, like Lockett does, he'll break off a route and he'll move with them and give him an easier target. DK seems more like he is sticking with it or kind of almost giving up on some of the plays. So yeah, I don't really know what the deal is there, but I get what you're seeing, and yeah, I don't know. It seems like that connection should be better than it is, though. All right. Um, do the Hawks tank for a QB? Um, what? They're 5-3. They have a winning record. They still have a inside track to get to the playoffs. Like I'm not even sure how that question would work. Um, I don't think they could lose enough games to have a good enough draft pick for that to even be enticing. Um, so no, no, that makes absolutely no sense. All right. Should the Hawks retire Wilson's number 3? No. I mean, if you look at the history of the Seahawks, there's only 5 numbers that are retired, and only 4 of those are for players, right? One of them is the number 12 for the fan. So the Seahawks aren't exactly an organization that has a history of retiring numbers. Will he be in the Ring of Honor? Of course, right? He brings a Super Bowl to the city. They go to a second one. He sets just about every Seahawk passing record, that there is. So at the end of the day, he will end up in the Ring of Honor. There is no doubt. Will they retire his number? Probably not. Probably not. But based on that, they're also probably not going to retire Bobby Wagner's or Sherman's or Chancellor's or Lynch's. Like they just don't have a history of retiring a lot of numbers. So I don't think that'll really be the thing. Is it possible? Sure, but I figure it's probably unlikely that they retire it. But he'll be in the ring for sure. All right. Um, how many countries have I watched a Hawks game in? So I have 4, I guess. So Canada, the U.S., Mexico, and Jamaica. Um, the other countries I've been to just didn't happen to be football season. It doesn't really matter where I am on the planet if the Seahawks are playing, or really football in general. I will tune in. So I'm not really limited to those. It just happens that usually when you travel, it's you know not football season. So yeah, I mean a lot of my travel has been in like March, so there's no football being played at that point. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, I would watch it anywhere. All right. Um, can they hold Washington under 100 rush yards? Um, so probably, because as a team, they're averaging under 100 yards anyway. They're 26th in the league in rushing. Um, Plus, they don't have key pieces on their defense anymore. So our offense is going to be able to control the ball against them. Again, Sam Howell's been sacked a bunch of times. So I don't foresee this being a fun outing for the Washington Commanders. So yes, I would expect that our team puts up some decent stats this weekend. If they don't, then obviously that creates a lot of other questions, and really kind of ones that you don't want to have to answer. Um, all right, so let's talk about this Washington game a little bit. So they're headed home to Lumen Field. And so if you are going to the game this weekend, then definitely make a lot of noise. Remind people that this is a town that is hard to play in. And one of the questions that I got is, am I going to the game? I will not be at this game, but I will be at the game on Thanksgiving. That's that Thursday night game. Should be a lot of fun downtown. Fortunately, I'll be sitting in a spot in the stadium where I should probably stay relatively dry. I have no doubt that it's going to rain because it is November in the Pacific Northwest, and it is likely going to be bad weather. So, but if you're going to this weekend's game, be sure to be loud. Always love to see a lot of false starts, and it's a young quarterback, so you can probably stack a few of those up. So if you're there, be loud, be a true Hawk fan there. All right. This should overall be a get right game for the Hawks. Again, they've played well outside of playing against Baltimore. They played pretty well. They found ways to win. This is a game where I want to see it be more of a blowout than them playing down to the level of whoever they're playing. This is one where this team needs to get some confidence. They need to come in and really just smack them. Just because, you're going to go up against a Rams team that, albeit not great, but the Rams always play Seattle tough. We saw them week 1. They did work after we lost our offensive lineman. So we need to be able to split on this game. So they need to get the win against Washington. They need to get another win against LA, because then you have that gauntlet of the Niners, Cowboys, and Eagles that, realistically could potentially be 4 L's. And so then you'd have to win out to get to that 10-7. So there's still a clear path to the 10-7. I think they split with the Niners overall, but I mean, it should be a game that they could easily win. They're a 6-point favorite in it. I think they cover, because again, Washington gets rid of Sweat. He goes to the Bears. They get rid of Chase Young. He goes to the Niners. So I feel like our offense should be able to move the ball pretty well. And as bad as their offense has been playing, I feel like our defense can be opportunistic and get some sacks, get some turnovers. This looks good for Seattle going into this game. And of course, another key to this is Geno has to play clean football. If you watch Washington against the Patriots, their defense, even without those guys, if your passes are off target, they will intercept you. They will take advantage. So it's not like they are devoid of talent. But, roster to roster, they're not as good of a team. But you still have to play good football, and the offensive line has to protect the quarterback. It all starts in the trenches. I don't care how talented your team is. If your guys, if you can't protect, it doesn't matter how open a guy is, because your quarterback doesn't have long enough in the pocket for him to be open. So, that'll be the biggest thing, is Geno has to play smart football. They're not playing a top 10 or top 5 defense this week. They're a bottom 5, bottom 6 defense. So at the end of the day, this should be a game that they can pick up. So I feel pretty good about it in that way. Let's see. We got, let's see. And as far as the division, then, they really obviously need to win these. They need to split with the Niners, because then it'll really come down to that second game with the Niners, right? So if they can win this weekend, next weekend, win on Thanksgiving, I would appreciate that, because I'll be there. And then even if they lose to Dallas, which I don't think they will, because it's December football, right? And Dallas forgets how to play football in December, so they could potentially win that. But say they lose it, and then say they lose the second one to the Niners and then lose to the Eagles, um, then you still have the ability to maybe lose against the Steelers. Not that I think they would, and you still end up at that 10-7, which should be a wild card team in the NFC. So, I mean, there is a real easy path to still hit the win total that I was thinking. Because outside of those 4 games, the rest of the schedule isn't horrible. Because you still have the Cardinals, who may or may not be playing Kyler Murray, since it'll be the last game of the season. Their season is basically over. And at that point, they may be looking directly at a draft pick. So, that game may matter less to them. I know Kyler Murray is going to be coming back here in the next week or two. And, they want to get some tape on him. They want him to get back in the game. But if they have a meaningless last game of the season, they probably don't worry about him playing. They probably don't try and risk him getting hurt. And they're probably also looking at where their potential draft order is on whether or not they care about that last game at all. So that's a game they could easily win. This Rams game, if Stafford is still out, definitely could be a W. This weekend, I think they cover that 6-point spread. So, I'm looking for that. Okay. And then, of course, if you are watching here on Roku, stay tuned after this show for the MLB update. That'll be at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. And if you are watching on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, be sure to like and subscribe. It helps bring more of this content to you. And, so there's that. And then, of course, if you happen to be here in the Pacific Northwest on Sunday, the 12th, join me. I'm going to go out and hang out with my buddy Anthony. He is the coach of the Meadowdale Middle School. Good friend of mine, also an ex-teammate of mine. And so they're raising money for their football program. So it's a goodwill event. So be sure to bring any of your donations, reusable donations, obviously, and nothing bigger than an end table. They are going to be doing it from 9 a.m. to noon here Pacific time. And, just come support, come say hi. And so great cause, even better guy. And, it'd be a huge help for those kids. So definitely check that out. And then other than that, I'll let you get back to your Friday. Thanks for tuning in. Again, if you are watching on Roku, be sure to stay tuned and check out the other shows on this channel. Have a good day, everybody.